Welcome. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to the FoxVox voice-to-key recognition software, basic setup and installation. First thing you're going to want to do is download a copy of this software, which is available for free. Simply follow the link provided in the description. And while you're there, you can also download any one of the pre-defined libraries provided by the members of the community. Once you have the installation, go ahead and run the setup. Setup is designed to be straightforward and easy. And as way of note as well, you can also update the software simply by running the installer directly over a previous version of FoxVox to update it. The first thing to do with a new library is to define a voice command group. To do this, we click the plus icon and we get a new group. A voice command group is a way of organizing commands onto a particular group that is accessed through a recognized word or phrase. For the case of this test, we're going to go ahead and pursue setting up a key for a pause game command, which is executed when you press the key P. So with this voice group, we're going to go ahead and set up by clicking on the edit button. We're going to create a voice key called game. Now, whenever I say the word game, that's going to get me onto this voice command group. To test our new voice command group, to ensure that we're able to hear that, what we can do is activate the voice recognition by clicking on the Enable Voice Recognition icon in the menu. Before I do that, I'm going to just go here as well. We have a display console. I'm going to turn that on. This will automatically turn on whenever voice recognition is enabled. But in here, you'll be able to see the voice recognition, what it's hearing as you're speaking it. So let's go ahead and turn on the voice recognition and see if the word game is going to get us onto our game voice command group. Game. Okay, so we can see that command not found on game, voice group game was identified as we expected, but there are no voice commands defined, so obviously no command was found to execute, but it looks like the recognition was successful. The next thing we need to do once we've defined a voice command group is create a voice command to execute the pause key whenever we speak it. So in this case, we're going to create a new voice command. We're going to create a voice key, and in this one, it's going to be when we say pause. And I'm going to rename this voice command by double-clicking in the label and typing in its name. This is going to be a pause command. So now if I click on the information button, I can also see the keys that are defined, in this case, whenever I speak the word pause. So now I've created a combination of words: game to get me on the game command group, and then pause to execute the pause command. So I would say game pause, and then what we need to define here is an output command. So to define an output command, let's go ahead and click on the plus button here. And here we're going to create a new output. This is going to be the P key. And in this case, we can define keyboard or mouse commands. In this case, it's going to be a keyboard key. We can find the P down and up button, which would simulate a key press in the list here, or for faster, easier entry, we can go ahead and turn on the capture, press the P button, disable the capture, and you can see that it recorded the P key press and then the key unpress. So it's the key down, key up event for the P key. Now that we've got a command built, I don't think there's anything we need to do with it. We'll get into some of the details on what all this means later. Let's go ahead and add that command here. So here we can see that we're going to do the P key. Look at the info button, and it shows us our key that's being pressed. And you can see here it's going to be executed one time whenever we say the word game to get us on the voice command group game, and pause to execute the pause command. So, and then we're going to go ahead and save this. This is going to become our test game library. And now when we're going to go ahead and test out our fully defined key, we're going to go ahead and click Enable Voice Recognition, Game Pause. And you can see the word down in our log here, command pause was executed on voice group game. So to go ahead and see if that actually worked, let's open up a window. And we're going to run that again. Game pause. And you can see that the P command was sent to our active window when we executed the voice command. To define a second voice command, now that we've got our pause, let's just say in our game we have a resume key, which resumes the game when you press the R key. I know that might be a little strange. Most times it'd be a P for both pause and resume. We'll show how to handle that as well. But for now, let's just create a separate key. Let's say that we want to send R for resume. So on our game command, we're going to add a new voice command. This is going to be a resume. And for an output command, we're going to type the R key. Go ahead and capture the R. We'll call this resume. Okay, so now with this definition, we can say game pause. And if we click this little pin, you can open up and keep a command open if you want to see two of them together. So we've got a pause with the game pause, and we've got a game resume, which will send the R key. So let's go ahead and test these settings out with our recognition now. And just by way of mention as well, anytime that you disable and re-enable the voice recognition, it will rebuild the commands based on the commands that you've built in your library. But if you leave it running, when you create new keys, it's not going to see those new keys until you stop and then restart the voice recognition. So I always recommend you stop the voice recognition while defining the keys and resume in order to test them out. So we'll go ahead and turn it on and see how it goes. Game pause. Game resume. Game pause. Game resume. Okay, so there you can see the P and the R commands getting sent to the window as we executed our game pause and our game resume. So pretty simple to define these, but let's go ahead and make some changes now. Let's say that the resume, of course, it could also execute the P key. So a P could be a pause and then a resume. But let's say in our case that we want to just combine them since it's going to be the same output, but it's not an R. Let's go ahead and change that. Let's go ahead and delete the resume command. And now we're going to edit this here. We're going to say pause or resume. Now, either pause or resume is going to execute the P command. So go ahead and save that changes, and let's test out what that's going to do. Game pause. Game resume. Game pause. Game resume. Okay, so now we can see saying either pause or resume will press the P key for us, and depending on which state the game is, it'll toggle between pause and resume. Now the software doesn't differentiate between which one's actually resuming or pausing, just like when you press the P key, it just toggles between the two. But you can do that on a single command and have either one as an option. Okay, so one of the things about FoxVox is the ability to have flexibility in the speech that you say as well. And so maybe we don't want to say simply game pause, but we want to say game pause on my command, or let's change that, game on my command, please pause. Okay, well, the way FoxVox works is the first word game gets us onto the game key, and if the word pause is detected anywhere in the speech, then that command is going to be executed. So it should actually work with a longer phrase without any issues. Well, let's go ahead and try that. Game, on my command, please pause. Okay, so we can see that the P key was executed. It did pause, even though I had a number of other words associated with that particular command. So as long as we satisfy the requirement that game, being the first word spoken on the key, contains either pause or resume within the phrase, then that would be executed. For more flexibility, sometimes we don't want to have game be required to be the first word in the phrase that we speak. So maybe we'll want to say pause game rather than game pause. So one of the things that we could do is we could come here into the voice command and we could add reciprocal pause onto the voice recognition key, and then we could add game onto a command, which would create the inverse pause game, which would also get us to the same key. But with the updates in FoxVox, there's actually a simpler and better way to do that now. Rather than creating the inverse on the key, what we can do is make game a wildcard. By adding an asterisk on the voice recognition key, and it can come anywhere on the key, at the beginning, at the end, doesn't really matter. Just as long as an asterisk is defined on the recognition key, it becomes what I call a wildcard recognition key. And a wildcard key means that it can occur, it's not limited to being at the beginning of a phrase, but it can occur at any time or moment in the phrase. So with a wildcard, I can say game pause or pause game should get me on the phrase, because both words, game and pause, will be satisfied to be able to execute that. So let's go ahead and test that out. Pause game, game pause, game resume, resume game. Okay, so there you can see that the pause was executed on either command, pause or resume, and it didn't matter the order. So that gives us a little bit of an additional flexibility. One thing to note about wildcards and voice command groups is in a particular phrase, FoxVox will always go top to bottom in order of voice command groups, and then in voice commands on which one it finds. So once it satisfies a command group and it satisfies a command key, that command key will be executed, and it will stop executing anything that's found further down on the list. So you've got to be careful with wildcards and defining these, because if you ever use the words game and pause in another phrase that you want it to do something else, you just need to make sure that you're picking the right keywords in your library so you don't have commands overshadowing other commands that come further down. But it is, as you can see, very flexible and easy to create these bindings with their associated outputs. Okay, so with wildcard definitions, we have a lot of flexibility in configuring how we say our voice commands. But sometimes that can cause a problem. Let's give another example here where we might have two conflicting commands that we have to resolve. In our game, we're going to have a command that's called request taxi, and we're going to have another command that's request taxi back, in which case we're going to create a voice command group. And this is going to be a request command group. We're going to have two commands. We're going to add a new voice command here. This is going to be taxi. And let's say request for taxi. Let's make that just be a T key. And we're going to have another command then, which is request taxi back. So let's go ahead and duplicate this command. And this one, we have to say request taxi back to execute. And in this case, it's not going to be a T. This is going to be a B. Okay, so now we have on this command, if we say request taxi or request taxi back, and let's go ahead and edit our title. And pin these so we can see it. Now in this case, we're going to have a problem. If I say request taxi back, it's going to say request taxi, and it's going to execute the taxi command with a T. Let's test that out. Request taxi back. Request taxi. Request taxi back. Okay, so I was telling you that these function in the order that they find it. Request taxi fulfills the requirements for this key, which is higher up in order than this key. I can fix that by moving this one up. And now this one, whenever I say request taxi back, it will execute this key and request taxi would execute on this command, but request taxi alone without, actually this one requires a taxi or a back. Let's see what this does, just to kind of give you an indication here. Request taxi back. Request taxi back. Okay, so this key, the way it's defined, allows the words either taxi or back. So what we want to do is actually change this. We want to make this a compound key. I must say both words, taxi and back. I don't want it to be an or, but I want it to be an and. So I'm going to go ahead and move back onto a separate recognition key and remove it from an optional key. Now the way this defines is it's going to have to see one of the words in this list and one of the words in this list, in which case it's taxi back. So now I've got a compound key that should resolve the issue that I've been having. Let's test it out. Request taxi back. Request taxi back. Okay, so by doing a combination key, I've isolated taxi back from taxi as a requirement, and it can differentiate between the two. That being said, I can also reorder these back to the original order, and request taxi will fulfill this one. But if I say request taxi back, it's going to find this one first. And let's say I want this one in front of this one for whatever reason, because of an order in the different commands. It makes it a little bit easier for me to see the taxi in front of the taxi back. To be sure that I don't get onto this key, what I can do, I'm going to put the word back on here, and I'm going to make that a blocking key by clicking the little icon next to it. By creating a block key, that's going to prevent anytime I say the word back from, if it's within the phrase, then this key is going to be denied. So here's yet another way to achieve the same result if I didn't want to do it based on the order. So let's go ahead and test that out. Request taxi back. Request taxi back. Okay, so there you can see that um, the block on the back has prevented this one from executing and allows me to get onto this key, which requires it. So the back actually prohibits this one and gets me onto this one. So the combination of the two gives me good speech adherence and recognition when I have keys with a similar word. So far in FoxVox, we've used just simple output key commands as single keys being sent out to the application, but FoxVox actually supports complex macros as output. You can combine outputs by dragging in additional ones that'll execute in sequence. For example, if I wanted to do the B key after the T key, I could drag from down here and copy that up to there. I could do several of them. If I wanted to output the T key followed by 3 B key outputs, I could change this in this instance to say go ahead and run this one 3 times and delete these 2, and I would get the same effect. So I'd get a T with 3 B outputs whenever I executed this command. Another nice thing that you can do is store your output commands in your output library. So once you have macros defined, if they're used in other places on the command, which is frequent with a number of different games, you can store them simply by copying them to your output library. And then from there, you can drag them in and use them on other commands wherever you might want them. So it makes editing and managing your libraries pretty easy, a little bit of a simpler process. Before we go, I want to just discuss on the outputs a couple things that we hadn't mentioned yet. And that is when you're capturing keys, you can also enable tracking the timing, which will track pauses between key presses and repeat. If you want to press and hold a key, it'll track how many times the auto repeat was generated. Of course, you can always set that manually by right-clicking on the key and tracking it. As well, when you track combined keys, for example, if you do a Shift A, you can actually track that as you press them. You'll see a shift down followed by a key down, up, and then the shift button back up. So by wrapping them this way, you've got multiple key presses. And also by way of note, when you're talking about shift, left versus right, the difference between the keys is in a shifted value that's sent on the Windows input layer. Some games will treat that differently. Some won't see a right shift, for example, versus a left shift, or it might mean something different in the game, or it might not work. So if you are trying shifted controls and you're trying like a left shift with an A and it's not working, be sure you try the right shift with an A or a different on the other side of the keyboard because sometimes that shift flagged isn't treated the same in all games. So just a little tidbit. As well, when you test the commands as you saw during the video, you can also open up a test window, which will pop open during the test, which will then display the values. You can change configurations here with the set configuration. So on this command, when you speak it and this command is executed, you can switch configurations. And you can also run and open a file directly. Just browse to the file, or it can be an executable, it can be a document, it can be anything that's registered with the Windows Shell application that will open. It can be an audio file as well, in which case you can choose to run it internally with FoxVox's internal sound player, or you can you just use a default Windows associated application by unchecking that. And then it supports comments on commands. This is just a nice little feature here. If you want to say something to kind of remind you of what that command is, you'll get a little comment indicator that'll show up. You can put a tooltip over. Go ahead and just say test comment here. And on that command, you'll see a little comment that pops up that you can then remember what that was. So just a little thing to store with it. If you're trying to do long, complex phrases with FoxVox, sometimes things can get a little bit difficult in the recognition if it's not configured properly. So I wanted to touch on a couple of things that are in the software that allow for longer, complex phrases to be recognized accurately every time. One of the things about voice recognition is it recognizes the words that are defined on the individual keys. For instance, in this simple scenario that we have game pause, request taxi back, all very short 2-3 word phrases that have all been defined, which it does a really good job of recognizing those. But when you start saying longer phrases, especially that haven't been defined in the voice keys themselves, things can get a little bit strange. So we're going to do a test here. Picked a longer phrase. We're going to go with Houston, we have a problem with long recognition. Here's a longer phrase, and we have a proper name in here as well, which doesn't show up in the default dictionaries. So we're going to kind of see what happens with prediction when we say this and how well the recognition works. First, let's try it without any keys defined. And what we're going to do, we're going to turn on enhanced logging so we can see what's going on during the recognition as we're speaking and just kind of watch what happens. Houston, we have a problem with long recognition. Okay, so the very first thing is we said the word Houston. You can see that it actually did pick it up. It found a Houston. We have a problem. It's picking up here's to have a problem with long recognition. The final process phrase was here's to have a problem with long recognition. It didn't quite nail what we were trying to say. And what's happening in FoxVox is we set up these keys, and these keys have these words defined, but as soon as we start using words that aren't defined on the keys inside any of the voice commands, it goes to a fallback default grammar, and it's at this point just doing general recognition. And general recognition isn't going to be as precise or as accurate. And so once we start putting some keys in order, we're going to get a little bit better. Let's go ahead and create a key now. And we're going to do Houston. And we're going to set up a key with problem. So if I say Houston, we have a problem, I should get onto this voice command. Now this key has two words defined on it, Houston and problem. So anything in between, anything extra that we're saying will be a little bit difficult. So let's try see what's going on with this one. Houston, we have a problem with long recognition. Okay, so again, Houston switched over to Kristen. We have a problem with long recognition. Didn't match it. It ended up going with Kirsten. Things kind of bumped off. What happened here was as we began speaking with the word Houston, it immediately recognized Houston. But as we continued speaking, it was expecting Houston problem. And as we inserted further words, it went to a default general grammar. And on the default general grammar, Houston isn't defined. So we kind of bumped off, and the deviation was a little bit harder to recognize that. So if you have a phrase that's longer and more complex, you can get it to work. Let's try it again. Houston, we have a problem with long recognition. And still having problems with it. Houston, we cover problem with one recognition. It's just not seeing and executing that command. Part of it is because we don't have these extra words. So if you know you're going to be using phrases and words that are associated with it, in order to keep us on this key, we know that we're going to be saying more. So we're going to add some assisting phrases onto this command. We're going to say, we have, the word is not going to be required. Articles like of, the, for, and the are going to be included by default. So no worries there. We're going to say with long recognition. Okay, so by defining this, now as we say these individual words, it's going to stick on this key a lot better. So we should get a much more accurate response. And what will happen is as it's recognizing and it sees that we're not saying game or pause or request, taxi back, it's not catching any of these words. Rather than falling back to the default grammar, it should be seeing Houston, we have a problem with long recognition, and it'll stay on this key, kind of stick to it since it's recognizing the words that are being spoken and help the speech recognition attenuate the accurate command. So let's try that again. Houston, we have a problem with long recognition. Okay, so now you can see we said that same phrase, and it did a much better job of just sticking on the phrase that we were saying, because the words were recognized and part of the grammar. So that's how assisting phrases can really help us get a much better, more accurate execution on these command keys. So assisting phrases can be really helpful when you've got longer, more complex phrases that the voice recognition wants to see. And you notice that assisting phrases aren't going to be a requirement of the key. They don't have to be there, but by having them defined on the key, it certainly helps stay there. You can define assisting phrases on the voice command group itself if it's going to be always associated with any of the commands that might be associated with it. You can also put the assisting phrases onto the command itself, and you'll have the same result, howbeit it's more associated with just the problem command if the words are more associated with that. So it's kind of how you like to organize them, but either way it's going to help. Something else you can do also with a game is rather than defining assisting phrases directly onto the keys themselves, we can also put these words into the global dictionary that will then be attached to all of the individual keys. So if there's phrases that are common to the game all the time, by associating those phrases inside of the global dictionary, that's going to also help make those words recognized within the library itself. So I'm going to change this up. Let's put "we have" with long recognition into our global dictionary. We're going to just put the whole thing into here. Actually, no, I want to keep the Houston out. We're going to say "we have" with long recognition. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and delete those words out of the assisting phrases on the voice key, and we're going to give that another test. Houston, we have a problem with long recognition. Okay, so now we've put them as part of the global dictionary, and you can see that it didn't have any problem at all following along with what we were saying. The voice accuracy became a lot more accurate because as we were speaking the words, rather than fall back to a default global diction, just a default grammar for basic voice recognition, these words are defined within these commands. So it stayed on these commands, recognizing all the individual words that we spoke. The fact that I didn't put Houston into the dictionary helps assure that we're going to get onto the voice command group here because it is part of the underlying word definitions phonetically because we've defined it here on this key, and same with the word problem because it's defined in here. But all of these helper support words have kept it, which we were saying these before, but because none of these words were ever used inside any of these phrases here, it didn't actually enhance or affect the recognition that was part of these keys. So commonly spoken phrases, you can really help your recognition and the effect in FoxVox by defining those appropriately, either on the commands, on the command groups, or within the global dictionary itself. One thing I also forgot to mention with the global dictionary is it basically creates assisting phrases for all of the groups. So any of the words that are defined in the global dictionary are basically applied to all of the individual command groups and voice commands as though it was defined on all of them. So if you want to be specific, stick to a key. And if you want to associate that with all of the command groups, then put it in the global dictionary. Defining push to talk in FoxVox is an easy process. You can define push to talk keys on individual voice command groups, or you can define it for the library as a whole. To define it for the library, go into the settings, push to talk, select the push to talk assigner, and Once here, the capture will be automatically on to allow you to assign that. Go ahead and press the keyboard key or joystick button that you want to use. I'm just going to use the key A. So when I press and hold A key, then it should be listening. And that'll go ahead and that will assign the push to talk for the entire library. So when command voice recognition is enabled, you'll notice that it's not listening, that it's kind of grayed out unless I push the A key. So when the A button is depressed, you can see it toggling the push to talk and turning on the recognition. But without it, the software is ignoring everything that I say. So let's go ahead and test that. Game pause. And there we go. Push to talk for the entire global settings. And you can override that and have you can leave a global push to talk and then have a different push to talk assigned on a different key. So let's go ahead and say when I press the B key, let's go here. Okay, so you can see the push to talk being enabled, and you can see it turn green and highlight whenever I've got the button depressed. So if I press and hold the B key, that's going to enable this voice group and override the global push to talk. Game pause. And you can see it executed there. You notice that while I'm speaking without pressing the A, voice recognition isn't working because it's not enabled due to the push to talk not being turned on. And you can assign different keys for different commands, which is nice. If you've got different radio frequencies or different commands for different things, you can choose when they're listening and when they're not. So push to talk, very easy to set up. Something some people might not be aware of is with the push to talk, you can actually use push to talk not only as a gateway to recognition on a particular command, but you can use it to activate a command without any speech. So let's just say, for example, you have a command that you want to do under a single word. In this case, let's create a command that we're going to say stop. And if I don't have any voice keys defined on stop, but I define a push to talk as an isolated button, and I'm going to go ahead and assign the S for stop. And you'll get kind of a special feature in FoxVox. So now when I press the S key and say stop, the push to talk command button S is going to activate this command without any speech keys being required at all, which lets me then get on to the voice command of stop. Let's try that out. Stop. Okay, so the push to talk can actually be used as an assignment to get onto a key. Again, be careful with this because if you create another key that does the same thing and is bound with the same button, if I did the S key on another command, the first one would be the one that it would activate on. So even though I might have other commands defined on other keys that would follow after this, they wouldn't be executed because this is the first command that it would find activated due to the push to talk, and it would only look for commands, voice commands on this stop key. So anything else would be ignored. But if you want to tie a command group to a command key and not have any voice activation on that, you can do it with the push to talk. Another nice important feature of FoxVox is the support of different configurations, especially with shared libraries and different functionalities of games. Different configurations can be really valuable. By default, a default configuration is created with each library, but you can get to configurations by the configuration management button located just below the settings. Click on that and you can simply create a new configuration by typing in the name. It will automatically set you to that configuration. Configuration is good in that it resets all the push to talk features associated with that. So we just defined a push to talk. There is a global push to talk that was defined. You'll notice that there is no push to talk globally defined in this new alternate configuration. There's also no push to talk defined on the game command that we had. If I, let's see here, let's go ahead and turn off the recognition, because without that push to talk, it's busy listening to what I say and it's not finding anything. If we change our configuration back to the default, you'll notice that our push to talk keys are back to being defined both globally in the library and on the game keys. So push to talk is definitely controlled by the configuration, and you can reset those. You can come in and delete all the push to talk assignments in the current configuration and reset those to another one that you want to do. But configurations are good if you're using different joysticks, for example. So you want a different push to talk binding for one joystick versus another. You can have different configurations for those different joysticks that you might be using. Really kind of a handy feature. Another feature with the configurations is the ability to enable or disable commands. And you can do this on any configuration, but whether a command is enabled or disabled is stored with the configuration itself. So on our default configuration, we're going to have everything that's enabled, and we can say on our alternate configuration, let's disable the request command, for example. So back in the default, both commands are functional, but under the alternate configuration, the request command has been disabled. Again, this is a really nice feature when you're doing a game that's got multiplayer features versus single player. Sometimes in single player mode, you might want commands available to activate. And when you're in a multiplayer situation, you don't want those commands to be active. So you can set a configuration for single player or multiplayer. Some really nice features with the configurations. The number of configurations is unlimited. You set as many as you need, and you can set, again, the push to talk, and the enabled disabled is associated per configuration. Sounds can be an important part of a game as well, and FoxVox certainly supports assisting with audio outputs as well. Sound can be associated with execution of voice commands. It can be associated with push to talk, and it can be associated as an output in a sequence. So if audio is something that you require just for feedback when a command has been executed, or for whatever purposes, there's several ways to do that. When you're looking on a voice command group, you can associate a sound which plays anytime that group is activated. Simply go to the little speaker, click on the speaker, and it'll default to your sound directory, or the last place that you've associated any sound files. But you can assign any sound files then that will then play whenever that voice command has been activated. Simply remove a sound by right-clicking on the command group and removing the sound. Push to talk, you can assign it within the push to talk. Again, if you want it to sound when the push to talk is active, or when if it becomes inactive, you can associate sounds that way. Again, right click and you can just remove the sounds that are associated. Right click on each one and remove that if it's something you want to remove or take off. You can also associate sounds with voice commands, individual commands, the same thing. Simply click and associate a sound. And finally, on an output, you could play a sound file associated with a file. So when you define an output, if you want it to play a sound in that output, you can do so. What's nice about building it into the output is that we'll honor the sequence of delays or any timing that's associated with it. So you can control when that sound plays, or you could make that sound play after a certain delay. Anything that's in the command chain here, for example, if I inserted a pause, I could say 5,000 millisecond pause, which is equivalent to 5 seconds, and then I associate a sound file. That sound would play 5 seconds after the command had executed. So you can control how and when those sounds play if you do it through the output. Again, several different ways that sound is supported in FoxVox. There are several built-in recognition commands within FoxVox that are used to control the speech recognition during operation. These commands can be accessed by clicking the Expand Collapse chevron control next to the Library Settings button. Click to expand, you'll see Cancel Output, which is used to cancel a long-running output macro in mid-operation. Pause listening stops listening using a voice command. Resume listening resumes. Create alias allows you to create an alternative voice key on the fly for any particular command group that is used during that session only and is not saved with the library. Spell output allows you to output letters or numbers directly as a chain by using your voice and spelling out the input that you want. Let's go ahead and do an example of one of these. The spell output being relatively new, let's go ahead and try that. In order to use these, the first thing you need to do is create a voice key to access the command. In this case, let's go with the default title of spell output. Spell output 1150392. Okay, there you can see we captured our spelling as an output. What's nice about that, it just puts out what you say in terms of letters or numbers. One thing with the spell output to keep in mind is that military calls are not supported, such as Alpha, Bravo, Tango, Echo. Definitely need to say A, B, C, just stick with the letters and numbers, but that allows you to do a chain of commands as a single output, kind of convenient in some instances. Let's go ahead and do one more test here as well. Let's go ahead and show the create alias command. In this case, we're going to go ahead and create an alias on request. On our command key, we have request taxi back. We want to change this to Victor. We'll just say Victor taxi instead of request. So on the fly, we could create that alias. Go ahead and show you how we would do that. First, we need to define a voice key. Don't forget, it won't work without that. And we'll again use the default title as our voice key, create alias. Create alias, request, Victor, Victor taxi. Okay, so there you can see we created an alias of Victor on the request command. So instead of saying request, we could say Victor, and then we executed that command by saying Victor taxi as opposed to request taxi. So this can be useful if you want to use an alternative word. Great for if you're doing a pilot call sign, or if you're speaking with the AWACS and you want to use a designated call sign for the AWACS as opposed to AWACS for a command, or however you want to use that, but it does allow you to create alternatives on the fly. You can do that pre-game and have it ready to go. Also can be hard-coded and defined on the voice command group if you want. Again, remember, aliases aren't saved with the library, so you would have to recreate a new alias every time. So they're kind of a one-time, easy to set up use. After creating our alias, we can also go to the command key and see them by clicking the little information button. Will show us our defined keys, and you'll see the alias show up as an italicized key on the command. And you can choose to delete the alias by clicking on the little delete button next to it if you want to clear an alias that's been created. A new feature of FoxVox is its ability to send mouse outputs and do mouse control using voice commands. Other software has this as well, but I want to show you how it's done in FoxVox just to give you an idea of what you can do. So in this scenario, what we're going to do is set up a voice key command to do a drag and drop operation. We're going to drag a file into this drop folder using voice command. So let's go ahead and set up a drag drop command. And let's go ahead and configure an output using our mouse. What we're going to do is a left click. So let's just go ahead and call this our drag drop. Let's go to our mouse controls. We can either drag in the left button. It's going to be a button down followed by a button up for a full click. Or you can just go to the mouse pad, cursor over, and click the button you want. You'll see it'll record and capture the button as you click it. Now, we need to be able to set some locations and positioning and timing to get this to work correctly. So you'll notice here on the left button, I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to assign the location of where the left button is to take place. Come over here and we're going to down left click on our file. And our our left click up is going to occur over here. So it's going to be a down click here, it's going to move, and the click up event will take place over here. So I'll go ahead and show you something. We'll test it. Okay, so you can see that it did a down click and an up, but we didn't drag our file successfully. This is because Windows Explorer requires a little bit more than just a down and up. And a lot of applications do this. In order for a drag event to take place, some timing and sometimes ancillary movement needs to take place in between. I did a little testing with Windows and to see what minimal amounts of input I could get away with here. What we need to do is we need to do a couple of interim moves in between our initial spot and our drop spot in order to get it to work. So we're going to go over here to a mouse move. We're going to say set location here. We're going to move kind of halfway up in between just to the edge of the file. And we're going to add another move, which is going to be slightly further up from there, kind of at the bottom of the folder here. This is going to create a sequence of moving. I'm going to put those in between the mouse clicks, and in order to make them work correctly, I'm going to put a delay on those of just 50 milliseconds, giving the system time to register those movements. Now, this was a little bit of trial and error on my part, trying to figure out how to do this, but let's go ahead and test that now. Okay, so there you can see we successfully dragged and dropped our file into our folder. Let's go ahead and reverse that back. And then you can chain and add on any other operations that you want to occur. So let's go ahead and do that as our drag and drop. And let's add another one. Now you could do this all in the same command, or you can build a new one. And we're going to call this open file. So what we're going to do here is we're going to first go into this folder by double clicking on it. So let's go ahead and capture a mouse click event. And what we want to do is set the location of this right on our folder. If you want to test and see where that location is, you can right click on the command and say go to location. You can see where that location is. You'll also get coordinates displayed if you highlight over the location indicator. So we want to do that, but we also want to then do that 2 times. It's going to be a double click, mouse down twice. And on the mouse down, it'll actually see the inverse. It'll go down, up automatically. That's just built into FoxVox to do that. Let's see if that'll get us into our folder. And it does. So to set the location and position for the file open, let's go ahead and drag and drop and find the position for that. Let's go ahead and add another double click Oops, not a move. And let's assign the location on our file. And just for kicks, let's put a little bit of a delay on that one just to make sure that we've entered the folder before we do the double click. Bring our file back. And click OK on our open file. So now we're going to do drag drop open file. And let's give this whole operation a test. Request drag drop. Okay. So you can see we performed the drag drop operation, put our file into the folder, and then double clicked on it to open. So it gives you a little idea of just how powerful and what you can do with your mouse commands. You can use voice control then to do a number of things with respect to the game and what you need. So to wrap up, let's take a look at a standard library, see what a real library actually looks like here. You can see that there's several command groups that are defined. Typically when I get into a command group, I provide lots of different ways to get onto it, similar aliases, for example, change, switch, toggle, alternator, cycle. You can say any of these. For example, toggle spotlight, cycle spotlight, toggle smoke. And then oftentimes I'll put, when I have a key defined on one, for example, the toggle smoke, I can get to it through the change smoke or toggle smoke, but sometimes I want to do turn on smoke. So I have another one here for open. And in open, we have turn on, start, initiate, and you'll see that on this key, we also have another instance of our smoke specified here. So we can look and see what its output, that it's a control S for our smoke. And I can say turn on smoke, and then to toggle the smoke as well, let's go to the close, and we have a turn off, and again you'll see this smoke defined here. So by putting on multiple keys, it makes it a little easier to say things. I can say turn on smoke, turn off smoke, toggle smoke, any way I want it, it'll execute that command. So kind of a strategy to use when building libraries to make it more natural. Something else is, you'll notice in the library, this one has configurations already set up. If you want to have comms only output for on the ATC menu for communications, and you don't want to do any voice commands for controlling the ship, make it feel a little bit more natural, real to life. That will disable all of these extraneous commands and stick with just the ATC commands. Also have a couple multiplayer definitions, one for 2-player with Wingman, another with multiplayer that disables all of the AI communication tags. So just different ways you can set it up. You can see in FoxVox, very easy to see how to use them. If it's a new library, just click on the info tab. You can see which words will get you on to a particular command key. Select the command you want to say, and you'll see the required keys on that. And then any aliases that are available there. So for request formation landing, you have request inbound permission, formation and landing. So those two words need to be present, as well as any one of these, in order to get that command executed. And then here in the output, you can see what's defined. And quickly see, we're going to do the ATC menu, call it up and execute 3. Notice the multiplier twice, so it's going to press this, execute the T command twice. Then we have a nice output library with commands to use, so if we want to modify or edit this, we don't have to go recreate all those keys. They're defined for us. So good library setup usually is a good way to go. And remember, you can download default libraries with the FoxVox. It works not just with Falcon BMS, but any game that you want to use or implement voice control, or even productivity apps for that matter. Again, anything that takes keyboard output or mouse output, you can tie in with FoxVox and build and customize your own library.